Hello and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, and I'm here to talk to everyday superheroes helping nonprofits using technology. Today I'm joined by Amy Eisenstein. Amy, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So for those who are listening to you for the first time, I know you have your own podcast, so you're probably well known, and maybe some of my listeners have already listened to your podcast. But for those that don't, could you give me a brief intro of who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. Well, like you said, my name is Amy Eisenstein. I'm CEO and co-founder of the Capital Campaign Toolkit, and we are a support system for nonprofit leaders running capital campaigns. And as you mentioned, my podcast is called All About Capital Campaigns. I'm really happy to be here.
So I always like asking the first question to my guests of how they got started working with nonprofits.
Yeah, so I knew from a young age that I wanted to work with nonprofits. Right from college, I went to get a degree, master's degree in nonprofit management, master's in public administration, and I've been working in nonprofits for more than 25 years and consulting for almost 15 of those years. And I just always wanted to help people. It's just been an important part of my life. I did fall into fundraising, as I think many people do. I just have found that that is the number one way that you can help nonprofits, because that's what makes the engines turn. And it's been a wonderful career for me.
And then what does Capital Campaign Toolkit do? Is it an organization that offers specific services, or is it more of a workshop style, courses?
Not really courses. We are a capital campaign support system, and that means that we have campaign experts that advise and guide nonprofit leaders through a campaign. We have a portal of online tools, hence the name Capital Campaign Toolkit, with all the tools and resources, but our team of experts help nonprofits go through the tools and the steps in the system so that they can run effective and efficient campaigns.
I have to ask the question, what is the difference between a capital campaign and a fundraising campaign? Is like one a subset of another, or are they distinct?
Yeah, it's a good question. So nonprofits do lots of different types of fundraising, and all nonprofits probably have annual fund campaigns, meaning they're day-to-day fundraising that they do to run their ongoing programs and services. And lots of things fall into that category. Events, grant writing, direct mail, major gift solicitations are all part of an annual fundraising program. A capital campaign, on the other hand, is something that they do once in a while. It's a multi-year campaign that serves long-term needs and boosts the organization to the next level of programs or services. So often a building's involved in a capital campaign, although certainly not always. They do an expansion of their programs and services, or startups. They might be funding technology. It's long-term needs that they go to their supporters for once every 10 or even 20 years to make a special, huge one-time gift for long-term needs, as I said, to really catapult the organization to the next level of service.
Is there a way to quantify it, how much bigger it is? Is it like a 10x or 100x? Is there any kind of limits to a regular fundraising campaign versus these capital campaigns?
I wish there was a simple answer to that question. It's not. It's different for every organization. We work with organizations that are doing, on the small end of campaigns, anywhere from $3 million for their capital campaign. And those organizations might be raising $100,000 a year or maybe $500,000 a year, but now they need something that's, a $3 million or a $5 million campaign. We also work with organizations that are doing $50 and $100 million campaigns. And those organizations are building infrastructure and really technology and buildings to get their programs and services to the next level of service. And so, those might be $10 million or $15 million or $20 million organizations that are doing $50 or $100 million campaigns.
And I imagine then that the tools that you would use for a regular fundraising campaign are very different than the ones you'd use for a capital campaign. Like a set of tools might work for one, but not work for the other because it's so many times larger. Can you identify certain points that speak to that?
Sure, absolutely. I think it's about the capital campaign strategy that's really different. And the strategy for a capital campaign is that you start with the donors that are closest to your organization and that have the capabilities of making the largest gifts. And you go, it's sort of an inside out strategy and top down. We talk about it top down, meaning starting with the people who can make the biggest gifts and then going to your base for support, and from the inside out. So those people that are closest to your organization first, and then out to the community. So it follows a very specific format and has a very specific strategy. And you're right, these organizations are often raising 2, 10, or 100 times more than they do on a regular annual basis. And so they have to be strategic, planful, organized, disciplined. And so that's really where my team comes in and helps people understand how to approach, organize, and plan a campaign so that they can be successful.
Yeah, it's a totally different strategy. It's like, for example, when I help certain clients and how I help small and medium-sized nonprofits is a very different way than I handle enterprise-level nonprofits. It's a different ballgame altogether. So I imagine for the smaller organizations that don't do this very often, you mentioned every 10, maybe 20 years, I imagine it's very beneficial for them to reach out to you and to get guidance or to an external consultant for help.
I think the reason that it's so important for organizations of all sizes to use capital campaign consultants is because, for the most part, internal people at nonprofits, board members, staff members, executive directors, development directors, don't have experience on multiple campaigns from start to finish. And so they may have somebody at their organization who's worked on the tail end of a campaign or the beginning of a campaign, or maybe was there through a campaign, but it was really run by a consultant. And so they don't really understand yet the strategy, the planning, and what goes into building a campaign. And so we really don't want anybody to wing it. There is a system, and if you apply the system, for the most part, campaigns are successful. And it's organizations that I see that are trying to wing it or make it up as they go that really get into trouble.
Is there ever a scenario where you would recommend not using a consultant? To me, it sounds like an obvious choice because it's not so frequent, because the scale is so much greater. Is it always the best case scenario for you to hire someone?
Look, there are definitely organizations that have people who are extremely experienced in fundraising and have been through multiple campaigns. If you have somebody on your team who has been through 3, 4, 5 campaigns, you may not decide to use outside help, and that's fine. But those are few and far between. And, what really makes me nervous is when an organization says, well, even though we only raise, $1 million a year and now we're trying to raise $10 million, we think we can do it with no additional support or resources. And, I just think they're being, to use a cliche, penny wise, pound foolish. And the problem is they don't know they're being pound foolish until maybe a third of the way in, when they get stuck. And it's hard to go back and start the planning over once you're kind of in the middle of it. So, I understand it's a difficult decision for lots of boards and executive directors. But to me, if you're doing a big campaign and you've never raised that kind of money before, it's important to have outside expertise, especially through the planning of it.
I imagine as well that the external consultant would have lots of experience doing this kind of work repeatedly. Like it's something that's probably their bread and butter. It's just, another, not a cookie cutter scenario, but it's at least something they have a lot of experience with. They've seen, they have the scars, they have the wounds, the battle scars. And then, coming in, they know it gets plug and play, right? They're able to tell you what you should consider, what you don't need to consider, all these different factors. So when a organization is looking to hire a campaign consultant, what would you say are some of the factors that they should look for, things that they should look for or things that they should avoid in a consultant?
Right. Well, definitely campaign experience. I mean, that is what you're hiring. So hopefully the person that you decide to work with has worked on at least 5 campaigns before, but 10 or more is better. And, organizations that are of a similar scope, size, they don't have to be in your geography. They don't have to be exactly what you do. They don't have to be exactly your size, but they should be sort of have experience with kinds of nonprofits that you can relate to so that it makes sense that they would be able to translate their experience. And I would say that no campaign is exactly the same as any other. There's no cookie cutter, there's no one way, but there are patterns for sure.
When I was listening to one of your older podcasts talking about this particular topic, I was really surprised, and happily surprised, I should say, that you find it would be important that this consultant not have an hourly rate. Can you speak a bit more about why that is?
Yeah. So when I first got into consulting, I studied consultants, read consulting books to figure out how I was going to approach consulting. And I read a lot of literature on why it's bad to charge an hourly rate for both sides, for both the consultant and the client. And really, what you want to do is have one rate, either a monthly fee or a project fee, and an established expectation for what you're getting in return. And quite frankly, from the client's perspective, I don't care whether the consultant can do it in 15 minutes or it takes them 10 hours. I want the end result and what they've promised to deliver. And, like I said, whether they can do it in an hour or 20 hours, it shouldn't matter to me. And I don't want anybody ever to feel nickeled and dimed. I want a client to feel like they can pick up the phone and call and ask questions, email me, and get all their questions answered, and that I'm not charging them in 15-minute increments or hourly increments. This is they're not hiring a lawyer here. They are hiring someone to make sure that their campaign is successful. And that's what the fee should be for. Does that make sense?
Actually, it does. And it's a topic that's near and dear to my heart because I stopped charging by the hour over a year ago probably for the same reasons you just mentioned now, that when you work by hour, people measure your input and they don't measure your outcome. And that the outcomes are what really matter. It's what are the goals you're trying to achieve? How did we achieve them? Not about how many minutes or hours you spent on it. And
Right.
the second point of phone calls, the client should never have to make a business decision, a financial decision every time they want to need your help, right? They should be able just to get your help freely or part of the package without
Yes.
saying, is it worth, this number of hours or the same number of minutes?
Right.
So yeah, I mean, we could have a whole podcast just about not hourly billing, but I think, and it's a topic it's tough for some people because hourly billing is such an ingrained philosophy in so many organizations, for-profit, nonprofit, even lawyers, but there is a better way to do things. And I think that's a great comment to make and to share is that hourly billing probably is not helping you, even though you think that everyone needs to use it because everyone does use it. It's actually counterproductive.
Right. I think especially in the context of a campaign, you want to think about what kind of value you're getting from your consultant. So while a $50,000 price tag for consulting may seem high in the context of a $10 million campaign, it's a pretty small percentage. And so really just looking at what are you trying to accomplish and what value are they bringing to the project and how is that value priced in comparison to the end result.
Absolutely. There was another subtopic you spoke about regarding external consultants that spoke to the fact that you should never, or avoid at least, either responding to or sending out RFPs, requests for proposals. Can you dive a bit further into that?
Sure. So I think that an organization should not issue an RFP for a campaign because what they're doing is they are telling a consultant what they think they need. Often they're wrong or maybe not quite right. And what they're doing is putting all the consultants' answers into a square. And so they're often putting a square peg in a round hole by putting constraints in this RFP. What I think nonprofits should do instead is talk to colleagues and others in the field and say, who did you use for your campaign? What was your experience like with them? And should we consider them? And then pick 3 to 5 firms to interview and say, this is our challenge, or this is what we're thinking about. How would you approach it? So don't put the consultants in a box and don't tell them what you need. That's their job, the consultant's job, to figure out how they would help you. And by you telling them exactly what you need, you're really limiting the scope of answers. And I will tell you that the best and busiest consultants never respond to RFPs.
Yeah, I stopped responding to them as well. And I heard you did as well. For that very reason, is that you're now competing against price, for example. That's the single metric that can be used to distinguish one consultant from another, because with the constraints of an RFP, you can't really distinguish yourself any other way.
Yeah. So, I mean, do you want the cheapest help or the best help? That's what I always tell nonprofits. Price is a factor, but it's not the factor. And so really, you should focus on picking somebody that you want to work with, that's going to work well with your board members, that's going to work well with your staff, that's going to be highly responsive, that has experience, and that is a pleasure to work with. And if they cost more than another consultant that doesn't follow up and isn't good with your board members, to me, it's a no-brainer. I would pay more for the better value any day of the week.
Yeah, if a consultant can bring you 10x of what they're charging, then to me, that's worth it. So then tying back to the Capital Campaign Toolkit, how does that toolkit help nonprofits?
Yeah, so thank you for asking. We are so much more than a toolkit. We help nonprofit leaders who are in campaigns, heading into campaigns, preparing for campaigns with 3 main resources. One is we match them up with an expert campaign advisor who is their advisor, coach, mentor, guide through the process from start to finish. We also have, as the name would indicate, an online toolkit, an online portal of resources, tools, templates that they use side by side with their advisor through their campaign. So everything from a template and samples of campaign policies to gift range charts to budgeting templates to everything that they would need resources to implement their campaign. And their advisor guides them through that process. And the third piece of our support system is that we have weekly peer support calls. So they can call in. It's like office hours, or I lovingly call it fundraising therapy, where all of our clients are encouraged to call in to weekly calls that are facilitated by our expert campaign advisors and attended by their peers, and so that they can ask questions and learn from one another about how they're dealing with campaign challenges. And also, what I love most about it is that they learn questions get asked that you wouldn't even think to ask. So you get questions answered you didn't even know you had. And those who are farther along in a campaign get real pleasure out of helping and sharing their experience along the way for people who are a little bit behind in their campaigns. So it's a wonderful part of the toolkit support system.
I would suggest, or I would think that it's one of the most valuable parts, actually, to hear what other people are going through, other organizations are going through, to ask questions that you didn't quite think of yourself. I mean, it's a real game changer. You get access to not just your expertise, but also the knowledge and the benefit of everyone else's experience as well.
Yeah, they're magical calls, I have to say. It's a highlight for many of our clients.
And then tying it to technology, because of course that's one of my favorite topics. Are there any kind of technology considerations that you either add to the toolkit or part of the process, or ways that you can help nonprofits?
Yeah, so I have to say, one of the things that I'm most proud about the Capital Campaign Toolkit for is that we are the first and the only that I know of fully remote and virtual campaign consulting firm. It is not because of COVID, but we were remote and virtual working with our clients way prior to COVID. It's because it's effective and efficient and affordable. And so we really believe in leveraging technology, whether it's basic technology like Zoom or more advanced technology like donor CRMs that organizations are using to communicate with donors and to interact with one another. Like I said, we have the online portal of tools, and that's some basic technology, but honestly, I don't think it's something that any other campaign consulting firm that I know of offers at this time. So they can just log in from any device at any time and access any tool they need.
And that's from the perspective of you offering the services to nonprofits. Are there any technologies that you recommend that the nonprofit themselves work with in order to be able to manage this capital campaign?
Yeah, so there's so many products on the market. There are endless CRMs, as you are well aware. So what we emphasize is that an organization needs to be able to easily and effectively input data and, of course, get the data out so that they are aware of who their donors are, who their biggest donors are, their repeat donors, who's lapsing, all the things that technology brings to them. I mean, there's, basic technology tools that I think every organization should be using, like a program. I don't know what the word is, something like as simple as Slack to communicate, or Trello to plan out your project. There's endless examples that we could give of, everyday technology that are making our lives more effective and efficient.
Is there any kind of qualification process that you go through before helping with a nonprofit? Is there any feasibility studies? Because I understand you do take a different approach for feasibility studies. Maybe we should take a step. What is a feasibility study and why is it important for a campaign?
Yeah, that is a great question. So a feasibility study, it was probably misnamed back in the day. It's a little bit confusing to lots of organizational leaders in that they believe that a feasibility study tells them whether or not their campaign is possible, it's feasible. It probably should have been named a campaign planning study or a campaign readiness study. And so, but a feasibility study, as it's known in the sector, is something that tests your specific plan and your goal with your key donors and community leaders prior to officially deciding to go into a campaign. But really, what it's doing is helping you prepare for a campaign. It's helping you develop a specific plan and narrow in on a lofty and yet achievable goal. And it's also, if done well, drawing in your closest supporters and engaging the leaders in your community. So to me, we definitely recommend organizations do a feasibility study. 99% of the time. On the rare occasion an organization has really strong relationships with their donors and has a really strong sense because they already have a very robust major gift program. So on occasion, organizations maybe can skip a feasibility study, but the vast majority of organizations, we feel, should do one. It really sets up their campaign for success. And so anybody who's worried about a feasibility study telling you that you should not proceed, that rarely happens. What it does is tells you how to proceed. And there's a really important distinction there. And so if you have board members or even an executive director who wants to skip over the feasibility study, I would say don't. Very often when organizations come to us in the middle of a campaign and they're stuck or their campaign is stalled, it's primarily because they haven't planned well and they haven't done a feasibility study. So that's the beginning, a long-winded answer to your question, but I think you also asked about, we do have a different process. Would it be okay if I talked about how we do feasibility studies?
That was actually my next question, because I understand that you do have a different approach. So I'm curious to know about your particular approach.
Yeah, so the traditional approach most consultants do is that the consultants, an outsider, goes and talks to a nonprofit's biggest donors and community leaders about the campaign and collects feedback and analyzes it and makes recommendations to the board on how to proceed. We find that approach, although almost everybody on my team has been involved in that approach for years or decades, because like I said, that is the traditional approach. We've developed a different method and what we believe is a better way. And that is that we train you, the nonprofit leaders, executive directors, board chairs, development directors, to go out and interview your own donors. We walk with you through every step of the process and help you collect the data and analyze the results together, co-author the recommendations and co-present them to your board. But we think that this system, this method of you interviewing your own donors, has so many benefits, including that you're building relationships with your biggest potential donors before you have to go out and ask them for a gift. And the process is completely clear and transparent. The interviews are not confidential and anonymous, as they are when a consultant goes and interviews them. So you know exactly who said what, and you can get back to them and respond to them. And we're finding it to be just a much better process overall.
I think that's a great approach because at the end of the day, it's about leveraging your existing relationships and building them and expanding on them. An external consultant might be, very charismatic, but they will not have the same relationship that you as a nonprofit have with your donors, and that you want to continue because obviously, I imagine at some point the consultant will leave when the campaign is finished, but you want that relationship to keep on going. So having that and strengthening that relationship between the nonprofit and the donor, I think, is a very important part.
You're exactly right. And what we've found is that donors actually want to talk to the nonprofit leaders. They, for the most part, don't want to talk to outsiders or consultants coming in. They want to talk to people who are really going to see the campaign through and are in charge of the programs and services. They can have a much deeper conversation that way.
So these feasibility studies, is it part of the assessment that you would take before taking on a client? Like, are there any qualification steps or qualifying steps, I should say, that you would go through to make sure that a nonprofit is ready for a capital campaign?
So there are questions, of course, we ask when we're having an exploratory conversation with a new prospective client to see if they would be a good client for us to work with and if they want to work with our method. But most organizations that are approaching a capital campaign consultant, it's not like they woke up one day and decided they wanted to have a campaign. They've been thinking about it for months or years often. And so I would say for the most part, organizations that do approach us are ready to go into some form of campaign. Maybe it's not quite what they thought, or they need to flesh out the details still, but that's something that we would work with them on as we prepare for a feasibility study. We do have a readiness assessment on our website. So if listeners want to go to the Capital Campaign Toolkit website and go to our resources page, there is a readiness assessment that they can download and check off and see, do they have the right team in place? Do they have donors? Do they have a case for support? And they don't have to have that all in place and ready, but there's a continuum. And so we would definitely help with that assessment, but they can download it and start to do that self-assessment on their own.
The general approach that I see here is that you're really teaching them how to fish, so to speak. You're giving them all the tools, making sure that they're taking all the right steps to make sure that they're successful. But is it more of a, once you have all the information, you're good to go on your own, or do you find that you have a long-term engagement with certain nonprofits?
Most organizations we have a long-term engagement with. I think you're exactly right. We are absolutely teaching them to fish. And because this is such a project that is on such a scale and scope that is bigger than anything that they've ever done before, they often want to work with their advisor through the project. And so, sometimes the advisor is more of an accountability partner, a strategic thinking, brainstorming partner, a cheerleader at times. And so This is not often something that an organization really just wants to do themselves. We are giving them the tools and the resources so that they can empower themselves. And our expert advisors are there to bounce ideas off of, strategize with, plan with. And like I said, accountability and cheerleading is often a big part of the process too.
Yeah, I'm sure. So what's in the future for Capital Campaign Toolkit? Where would you like to see the organization in a few years from now?
Well, we are growing every year. It's super exciting because only 3.5 years ago, we rolled out these guided feasibility studies, as we called them, where one of our team members guides you through the process. We launched that just 3.5 years ago, and more and more organizations every year work on them with us. And we're excited to see this really new approach to feasibility studies catching on in a big way. We're really pleased to see organizations all over the country and, in fact, all over the world wanting to partner with the toolkit and our remote model of campaign advising, and the peer support community, as we discussed, is such an integral part of the process. So we're just looking forward to helping more and more nonprofits lead really successful campaigns.
I imagine that because everything is online, there's no real geographic boundaries. You could serve a nonprofit anywhere in the world.
And we do. I have to say, we're so pleased to be helping nonprofits in several countries and almost all 50 states right now.
Awesome. So listen, this has been great. Lots of wonderful information. Where can people find more about you and this Capital Campaign Toolkit?
Yeah, I would say the best place to start is right on our website, capitalcampaigntoolkit.com. And of course, if you love to listen to podcasts, we are all about capital campaigns on your favorite podcasting app.
Amy, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, folks, that's it for today. I'm Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again next time for Agents of Nonprofit.